Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm your host, Samantha Reigle. I've spent more than 20 years as a mediator helping people resolve conflict. But here on this podcast, I like to talk about why conflict and distress show up at all and how changing the way we respond can make life a whole lot easier. So today's an interesting topic. Can you imagine how you would respond if you actually met an extraterrestrial? If you saw the title to this episode, you probably thought we might be talking about aliens as in the immigrants. But no, I wanted to talk about extraterrestrials, aliens from outer space. I think it was like several months ago, President Obama went viral for answering yes rather quickly when the host, he was on some kind of show in the some kind of podcast, and the host had asked if aliens were real, and he had no hesitation. Pretty point blank with his answer. And it got so much attention, I think in part because he didn't hesitate and try and answer like a politician would. He was being honest. He later walked his answer back a little bit when he saw how much attention it got, and he tried to clarify that it was only his own opinion based on logic. But I think regardless how you interpret what he meant, people went crazy over it. It went viral. We saw something similar happened when Hillary Clinton was asked about UFO disclosure during her congressional hearing about Epstein. And that was kind of interesting because, again, she didn't dismiss it. She actually leaned into the discussion and said disclosure matters to a lot of people. And if she would have been elected president, that's something that would have been a priority to her, declassifying all that information that the government has. And then shortly thereafter, Trump comes out and says that he's declassifying more information related to UFOs. I just think it's so crazy that we're suddenly seeing so many of these types of discussions, and those that were in political power or are in political power are now seemingly answering in the affirmative that aliens, UFOs, have been real all along. These are discussions that would have been called conspiracies in the past. You know, I've said this before. I love this topic. I love watching documentaries about UFOs, their sightings, and reading about different encounters. I just find the whole subject so fascinating. But there are a lot of people out there who are very uncomfortable with the idea that other intelligent life might exist and that it could potentially visit us here or is here already. They actually refuse to believe it. And when you slow down and think about it logically, the idea that we might only be the intelligent life in existence should actually be more shocking, because you're assuming that we're the only intelligent beings anywhere. And I think that would be pretty impossible to believe when you think about the scale of the universe, right? We're talking about billions of galaxies, and inside each one of these galaxies are billions of stars. And what we've learned over the past few decades is that many of these star systems likely do have planetary systems orbiting them, just like in our own solar system in the Milky Way. So when you start doing the math and you look at it logically, you're suddenly looking at an unfathomable number of planets scattered throughout the cosmos. I kind of saw this reflected for myself. We went to the American Museum of Natural History in Manhattan several months ago, and there's a planetarium there. And if you buy tickets and you go see the show, during the show, they show an illustration. They zoom out from Earth, past our solar system, past the Milky Way, and keep pulling further back until you start to see just how vast this whole universe really is. And at some point, your brain stops trying to process because the scale is so enormous. It's remarkable and honestly incredibly humbling. That's only a portion of the universe that we can actually observe. And now even physicists are talking about the possibility of there being multiple universes that are layered within reality, and that's called the multiverse. Just thinking of it, I'm your average layperson. I'm not a scientist, but when you step back and really consider the sheer scale of existence, the idea that life might emerge somewhere else doesn't sound so crazy. And then you look at what actually humans are made of. We're made of the same elements that exist in stars, the same building blocks that exist throughout the universe. So if the ingredients for life are literally scattered across the cosmos, the idea that life could form somewhere else starts to seem a little bit less shocking and a little bit more, obvious. Assuming we're the only intelligent beings anywhere in all of existence is a little bit more narcissistic. It's a more narcissistic position. Okay, so let's bring this whole discussion back to what I like to do best, which is talk about how we respond to things that come up that might create conflict within oneself or between other people. And I think as it relates to how you would react if you met an extraterrestrial, an alien, or you were presented with information that aliens and UFOs are real, I do believe we would all kind of have an emotional reaction to that knowledge if we're really presented with it. An alien standing in front of us. I do think our first reaction would come from fear. Okay? And I say that not to judge or anything. I would probably have the same reaction if I met an alien, even though I'm pretty sure that they exist. I don't think most of us arrived at that emotional reaction of fear on our own through careful reasoning. I think we inherited the story. We've been trained by Hollywood, television. Think about all the alien movies you've seen, other than maybe E.T. The storyline has been the same. Aliens arrive, they're aggressive, they want our planet, humanity has to fight them off. And that story has been repeated and repeated so many times. Not just Hollywood, but books and just society in general. So now it feels like common sense. But when you pause and examine the premise, it actually can fall apart pretty quickly. Look, if another civilization had the technology to travel across galaxies, a multiverse, something we can barely imagine doing or even existing, that civilization would have solved problems we haven't even figured out yet. Energy, physics, space travel across dimensions, longevity. They would be operating at a level of advancement far beyond where we currently are, and yet somehow the story we've internalized is that they would travel unimaginable distance just to come here and behave exactly like human beings behave. Now, isn't that interesting? It is an interesting assumption, and when you flip the perspective, the whole thing becomes almost funny. Imagine a civilization observing Earth from a distance. What would they see? I can tell you, they're going to see a species that has managed to spread across the entire planet, but constantly fights with itself over borders, ideology, skin color, belief systems. This other being may all look at each other and say, no intelligent life here. Let's keep on moving. So the fear and the narrative starts to look less like logic and more like projection. We assume other species would invade us, dominate us, exploit our planet, because that's what exactly we have historically done to each other as human beings. Which brings me back to why I'm even talking about aliens on this podcast. I think this discussion is a perfect example of something that happens to us all the time. We inherit emotional reactions from narratives that were handed to us, and we rarely stop to question the premise behind those reactions. We might see something in the news, something goes viral, and it will challenge what we thought we know, and instantly the nervous system will react. We'll get fearful, angry, suspicious. But you know what I'm going to propose? Sometimes those reactions aren't coming from careful reasoning, they're coming from conditioning. And this is where the conflict portal lives. This is where the portal is, because any moment where you feel a strong emotional reaction, especially fear or stress, it is actually an invitation to pause and ask a really simple question. Where did that fear come from? Why am I reacting this way? Am I in danger? Did you arrive there through your own thinking, or did someone hand you that emotional script years ago? Because fear is a very powerful motivator. When human beings are afraid or our thinking narrows, the brain shift goes into survival mode. We stop exploring possibilities and start looking for threats. Our curiosity disappears, and that's incredibly useful if you're trying to escape a predator in the woods. But it's not always helpful when the thing that you're reacting to is an idea or narrative or a possibility. And that's why fear can be such an effective tool for shaping perception. When you are afraid, you don't tend to question the premise of the fear. You just react to it, and the story becomes accepted without much examination. So that means the moment where you stop and ask, wait, where did this reaction come from? You get to step out of that script. And conflict works the same way. A comment triggers you. A news story triggers you. A political moment triggers you. But the reaction feels automatic. I'm telling you right now, inside of these moments, there's always going to be a choice point. This is the portal. You can stay inside of that fear, that story that triggered you, or you can step back and examine the premise. And when you examine the premise, sometimes you realize the whole emotional structure was built on something not even real. Let's play a little bit more with this alien example. If the government releases more information tomorrow about UFOs or non-human intelligence, and maybe how beings on Earth are already here, already in communication in some way with human beings, which honestly might be happening in the next decade. Who knows? There's been a lot of congressional hearings on it. Look, most people would immediately fall into one of the conditioned reactions. Fear, suspicion, panic. But what if you experimented with a different response? Instead of assuming hostility, what if curiosity became the starting point? Wipe that invasion out of your imagination. They're not here to invade us. Imagine if they're not here to invade us. Ask, what kind of a civilization develops technology advanced enough to travel across the stars? What problems would they have solved that we haven't and would not even have thought about yet? About energy, conflict, cooperation, survival. Maybe instead of reacting from fear, suspicion, and panic, when you think of it this way, you open up to the possibility that maybe they're coming to help. Maybe they want to share their knowledge and help us solve something because we're struggling with these issues and we're unable to resolve it ourselves. Maybe they can teach us how to stop destroying ourselves. This could be an opportunity to bring us to our next evolutionary level. We can look at meeting an alien or having disclosure as a learning tool right now. So whether aliens have ever visited Earth or not it's beside the point, right? The deeper insight into this is our emotional responses and how they're shaped by narratives we've inherited without realizing it. And those narratives will continue to guide us with how we experience reality. But the moment you notice a narrative, you can regain your agency. You can ask yourself the questions that will guide you out of the response, the instinctive responses and reactions that you've had all along. And you can choose a more clearer, thoughtful, less reactive response. This is going to help you expand your perspective. And when you expand your perspective, your responses expand as well. You get your power back, because the alternative is having a narrow perspective, narrow responses, and you're feeling like the only few possible ways to react is to defend, attack, retreat, and panic. But when you expand those possibilities, you get new explanations and new responses become available. New experiences become possible that simply were not accessible to you before you shifted the way you see something. So change becomes possible inside of any situation, which in many ways is exactly what this conflict showing up is trying to teach us at all times. And like I said, conflict is inner conflict, duress, or external conflict you might be having with someone else. And I think in this example with aliens, it's like your own reaction is causing you distress to the idea of aliens being here on our planet. So, every moment of tension reveals the frame you're operating inside of. Every frame can be examined. You have the power to reshape how you operate. Sometimes the most peaceful response isn't found by fighting the situation. It's found by widening your perspective so that you can see all the options that are available. And when you begin to recognize that dynamic, something interesting happens. You start spotting it everywhere. I want you to think about, for instance, if you're reading an article, if you're really paying attention, there might be a point in this article where you start to feel a little enraged. You have to ask yourself, am I being emotionally manipulated by the way that this author is choosing their words? Am I being emotionally manipulated, or is this how I really feel? And I've gotten to that point now where I can watch the news or read something and I can literally point out where that person who the author or the person who's speaking, the commentator, is trying to emotionally manipulate me and get me to react in some way. It becomes very obvious. Once you start recognizing this dynamic, it's going to become very obvious. Not just with aliens. You'll see it everywhere. A lot of our everyday conflict or duress, a surprising amount of what we react to is being shaped by others or passed down to us. And we've never really had the chance to think about it for ourselves. The narrative about what's right, what's wrong, true, and believable is handed down to us and then repeated and then reinforced. And over time, it starts to actually feel like it's true. It's reality. But the moment you become aware of that process, you shift. You realize you have more choice in the matter than you thought. You can keep running these old scripts if you want, or you can start writing a new one. Practically speaking, how are we supposed to do this? I know that's a question you probably already have. Look, I already told you, you need to pause. when you get triggered, you need to ask yourself, is this my reaction, or is this emotional reaction that I have being told to me? Did I inherit it? And this will just give you enough space to change how you move through that tension. All right, guys, who knows? With the way that this conversation keeps surfacing in public life, disclosure about non-human intelligence might actually be closer than we think. I'm hoping it's soon. But if the day ever does come, we learn about another intelligent species and how it exists and how it's been observing us and how it's here to help us, I hope our first reaction is our own. I hope it's curiosity and being open. Because like I said earlier, if a civilization has evolved far enough to travel to our planet, I'm pretty sure they've solved some of these problems that we're still struggling with here on Earth. And there was absolutely something we can learn from each other. Maybe we can learn how to stop hoarding our resources and going to war with each other. In the meantime, the real opportunity for all of us is right here in front of us, learning how to question the narratives that we've inherited and choosing our responses more consciously. I hope you enjoyed this discussion, this perspective today. And until next week, don't react, but respond with intention.